The palace was alive with light and music, a glittering display of wealth that stretched across endless halls and marble floors. Chandeliers hung from the ceilings like captured stars, and the air smelled faintly of exotic flowers that grew only in the royal gardens. Courtiers in flowing robes moved gracefully between tables laden with food from every corner of the galaxy. The sound of laughter and conversation blended with the soft notes of instruments playing somewhere in the distance. It was a night of celebration, yet beneath the elegance, the palace hummed with tension. Kale walked through the grand doors with quiet confidence. His appearance was unremarkable by the galaxy's standards. He was human, and humans were rare, almost mythical in this sector. Many of the nobles had only heard stories of humans long ago, whispered warnings that they were primitive, unpredictable, and weak. Yet Kale carried himself with a calm presence, and his sharp eyes missed nothing. He was escorted by 2 palace guards to the central hall, where a feast had already begun. The council members, tall and regal in their ceremonial robes, glanced at him with curiosity. Some frowned, some whispered, and others barely acknowledged his presence. Humans were unexpected guests, and in this galaxy, surprise was often met with suspicion. Princess Lyra, the youngest child of the Galactic Council's ruling family, watched him from a balcony. She leaned on the polished railing, her dark hair shimmering under the chandelier's light. Unlike the others, she did not see Kale as a threat. She saw something different in him, something genuine and unassuming, a quiet strength that set him apart. Her curiosity burned. She had been trained to observe, to understand the politics and power of the galaxy, but she had never met a human before. During the banquet, Kale moved with care, bowing politely to dignitaries but speaking little. His words were measured, and when he did speak, his voice carried a natural calmness that made those around him listen, whether they wanted to or not. The nobles continued their conversations, discussing alliances, trade, and military power, but Kale's silence drew attention. People began to wonder, why would someone so ordinary appear so confident? Finally, Lyra descended from the balcony, weaving through the crowd with purpose. She approached Kyle as he stood near a table, observing the ornate dishes laid out before him. "You are not like the others," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Where do you come from, Kyle?" Kyle turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "I come from a small world, far from here," he replied. There was no pride in his tone, no arrogance, just honesty. "A world called Earth." The name made Lyra pause. She had heard it only in myths and forgotten stories. Earth was supposed to be long gone, a legend preserved in old records and cultural tales. And yet here was Kale, standing before her, alive and real. "What is it like?" she asked, her curiosity breaking through the usual formality of the palace. She expected him to describe advanced weapons or grand fleets, the kind of power the council revered. But Kale's answer surprised her. "It is not about weapons," he said quietly. "It is about people. Earth is full of people who try, who fail, who learn, and who rise again. They create beauty and music, they build and invent, and they survive even when everything seems against them." Lyra tilted her head, intrigued. "Survive? Against what?" "Against themselves sometimes," Kale said, smiling faintly. "Against the disasters they cause and those they cannot control. Against the fear of each other. Yet they continue, because they choose to, not because they are forced." The princess blinked. It was an answer she had never heard in the council chambers. Discussions of power were always about control, conquest, and domination. Here was Kale, speaking of resilience, creativity, and choice. As they spoke, whispers rippled through the nearby nobles. Some were amused. "A human preaching morality?" one whispered. Others were skeptical. "He is exaggerating," another muttered. but a few watched silently, curiosity sparking in their eyes. Even the smallest words could ripple into the politics of the galaxy. Lyra stepped closer. "Tell me more," she urged. "How do they survive when everything is against them?" Kale looked down for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "They survive because they find reasons to care for each other. They work together, even when the world tells them not to. They invent, they dream, and they make mistakes. But they keep going, and from those mistakes, they grow stronger." He paused, letting the meaning sink in. Lyra felt a stirring in her chest, a mixture of admiration and wonder. These were not the words of a conqueror or of someone seeking power. These were words of truth, spoken simply, yet carrying immense weight. "Do they fight wars?" Lyra asked, curious. Kale nodded. "Yes, but even in war, humans try to preserve what matters. They fight for survival, for freedom, for their families. Sometimes they fail and sometimes they win, but they always try to understand, to learn, and to do better. That is what makes them strong, not the weapons they hold." The princess's eyes widened. She had heard of countless battles across the galaxy, and many civilizations prided themselves on their fleets and armies. And yet here was Kale, speaking of strength in a way that felt different, real. "You make them sound almost heroic," she said softly. Kale shrugged lightly. "They are, but not because they want glory. They are heroic because they endure, and because they care enough to keep trying, even when failure seems inevitable." Lyra nodded slowly. She realized she had underestimated humans, just as many in the galaxy had. Her curiosity deepened. She wanted to learn more. Over the next few hours, Kale shared more stories. He spoke of cities built with creativity and care, of music and art that moved people to tears, of inventions that changed lives. He told of leaders who failed and learned, of ordinary people who achieved extraordinary things. Each story was simple, yet it carried lessons of resilience, hope, and unity. By the time the banquet was winding down, Lyra felt as if her mind had been opened to a new world, one that was not defined by conquest or power, but by spirit, perseverance, and the choices people made every day. She wanted to see this world herself, to understand its people, and to carry its lessons back to the palace. Meanwhile, Kale's presence did not go unnoticed. Some counselors frowned, seeing his words as a subtle challenge to their beliefs. Others were quietly impressed, realizing that they had underestimated not only humans, but the power of ideas. In a galaxy dominated by fleets and weapons, Kale had shown them a different kind of strength, one that could not be destroyed by fire or force. As the night came to a close, Lyra escorted Kale to a private garden, away from the eyes of curious nobles. The garden was filled with soft, glowing plants, their petals reflecting the light of the twin moons outside. The air was cool and fragrant, and for a moment, the palace seemed distant, as if they were alone in the universe. "Tell me more about your world," Lyra said, leaning against a marble railing. "I want to know what humans are really like." Kale smiled. "You want to know the truth?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Then you must know," he said slowly, "that humans are not perfect. They fail. They make terrible mistakes. They fight each other. But what makes them remarkable is that they keep trying. They keep building, learning, and caring. And when faced with the impossible, they often find a way through, not because they are stronger, but because they refuse to give up." Lyra listened, captivated. She realized that what Kale said was not just about humans. It was about life, about choices, about the courage to endure. She had never met anyone who spoke like this in the palace, and she felt a spark of something dangerous yet exhilarating, the thought that the galaxy as it was might be about to change. The night ended with Kale leaving the garden, bowing politely to the princess. She watched him walk away, feeling the weight of his words settle in her mind. For the first time, she questioned the stories she had been told, the assumptions the council had made, and the way the galaxy measured strength. Humans, Kale had shown her, were not weak or primitive. They were something else entirely. And Lyra knew that when the council learned what she had heard, it would not be easy for them to ignore. The palace had never seen a human like Kale, and it had never heard truths spoken so simply, yet so powerfully. The night left a quiet ripple of uncertainty, curiosity, and anticipation. Somewhere deep in her heart, Lyra sensed that the coming days would bring choices, revelations, and challenges that the galaxy could not predict, and she was ready to face them, guided by the stories of a world that had survived against impossible odds. The moonlight shone on the palace walls, and the stars above seemed to twinkle with promise. Kale's words had planted something new in Lyra's mind. The idea that strength was not always in fleets or armies, but in resilience, creativity, and the courage to endure. The palace, grand and proud, might be shaken one day, not by war, but by the truth of what humans were capable of. And for the first time, the princess felt a mixture of hope and fear, excitement and dread, all at once. She could not yet see the path ahead, but she knew that the journey had already begun. The next day, the palace was quieter than usual. Most nobles were busy with meetings, trade discussions, and ceremonial duties, but Princess Lyra found herself unable to think about anything except Kale. She had walked the halls, sat in the libraries, and even looked through records about humans, only to find fragments of stories, myths, and legends. None of them matched what Kale had described the night before. By mid-afternoon, she slipped away from her attendants and made her way to the private gardens again. The soft hum of water from the fountains and the gentle sway of the luminous plants made the palace feel like another world. And there, leaning against a marble railing with calm certainty, was Kale. "You came back," he said, turning to her with a faint smile. "I did not expect that." "I want to know more," Lyra said, approaching him. "Your words last night, they stayed with me. They are unlike anything I have ever heard." Kale nodded. "Then you must be prepared. Humans are not simple beings. They are contradictions, full of flaws and yet capable of greatness. If you are ready, I will tell you what they truly are." Lyra leaned forward, eager. "I am ready." Kyle began quietly, his voice steady. "Earth is not a perfect place. Its people have faced famine, disease, war, and destruction. Entire cities have fallen. Nations have clashed for power, resources, or fear. And yet, despite everything, humans endure. They adapt, they learn, they invent ways to survive against odds that would break most other species." Lyra listened, captivated. "Tell me about one of these times. I want to understand how they survived." Kyle's eyes darkened slightly, as if recalling a distant memory. During the early centuries, humans faced pandemics that wiped out millions. Medicine was limited, and knowledge was scarce, yet they studied, experimented, and collaborated. They shared discoveries with others, even when borders and nations tried to hoard knowledge. Slowly, generation by generation, they learned to fight disease, to protect each other, and to grow stronger. What is remarkable is not that they survived, but that they did so by choice. They chose to fight for life, not by command, but because they valued it. Lyra thought about this. In her world, strength was measured by armies, fleets, and weapons. Here was a man describing strength born from learning, cooperation, and determination. It was a concept unfamiliar to her, yet she felt it deeply. Kale continued. "And humans do not only survive, they create. They paint, sculpt, write, and compose music. They explore the stars, even before they knew what dangers awaited them. They ask questions about the universe, about life, about themselves. They fail many times, but each failure teaches them something new. Over time, this accumulated knowledge transforms their world. Lyra's eyes sparkled. Even in war, you said humans try to preserve what matters. How is that possible? Kale smiled faintly. Because humans understand what is precious. In war, they fight not just to destroy, but to protect. They risk their lives for family, for friends, for ideals. They are capable of cruelty, yes, but they are also capable of extraordinary kindness and bravery. A single person can inspire millions through courage or sacrifice. That is what makes them dangerous to those who underestimate them. They are unpredictable, creative, and resilient. Lyra felt a chill of awe. Humans sounded nothing like the weak or primitive beings the Council believed them to be. She had grown up learning that power meant control, domination, and order. And yet Kyle spoke of a power built from empathy, endurance, and ingenuity. "Tell me about their inventions," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Their technology." Kyle leaned back, gazing at the stars above the garden. Human inventions are remarkable because they are born from necessity. They did not have fleets to conquer or empires to support them. They had ideas, tools, and determination. They created machines to fly, to communicate across continents, and to explore the stars. Their greatest invention is often not a machine, but the act of solving a problem that seemed impossible. Lyra thought about this, realizing that creativity and survival were intertwined. Humans were not only reacting to their world, they were shaping it. And unlike the councils and rulers of her galaxy, humans did so without relying solely on fear or force. Kale continued with a story that caught Lyra completely off guard. There was a time when humans built machines to take them to the moon. They had never left their planet in person before. Many thought it was impossible. Yet they tried, failed, and tried again. Eventually, they succeeded. They set foot on another world, proving that persistence and intelligence could achieve what seemed unimaginable. Lyra's mouth opened slightly. She had heard of the tales in old stories, but Kale spoke with a certainty that made it real. She imagined humans standing on the moon, looking back at their fragile blue planet, knowing they had accomplished something incredible without fear or tyranny guiding them. Kale's voice softened. And humans did not stop there. They built cities that lasted centuries, made medicines that cured diseases once thought untreatable, and created art that could move millions. Their history is full of failures, yet each failure led to growth. That is why humans endure. They never accept defeat as final. Lyra felt a mixture of admiration and unease. She understood why Kale's words had unsettled some of the counselors. To hear that a species long considered weak could be so adaptable and creative was shocking. It challenged everything the palace believed about power and survival. Kyle noticed her hesitation. "Do not think of humans as invincible," he said gently. "They are flawed. They make mistakes that can destroy themselves. But they learn, adapt, and rise again. That is the real measure of their strength. Not the weapons they build, but the courage they carry within them." Lyra nodded, feeling a deep respect for this species she had never met. "I want to know more," she said. "I want to see how they think, how they live, how they face impossible odds." Kale looked at her thoughtfully. "Perhaps one day you will. But for now, remember this. Humans are dangerous not because they wish harm, but because they refuse to be underestimated. Many civilizations have tried to predict them, to control them, and all have failed. They are unpredictable, and that is their greatest strength." The hours passed quickly. Lyra asked questions about daily life, about culture, about the human way of living. Kale answered with patience, describing people who celebrated, mourned, struggled, and triumphed. He spoke of children learning, families caring, communities helping each other, and societies building knowledge over centuries. By sunset, the garden was bathed in golden light. Lyra realized she had spent almost the entire day with Kale, absorbing stories that challenged every assumption she had ever held. She felt a spark of excitement, a feeling that something new and powerful was stirring in the galaxy, something the Council had never anticipated. Kyle finally stood. "You must return to your duties," he said. "The palace will not wait for your curiosity." Lyra hesitated, not wanting the conversation to end. "Will you return tomorrow?" she asked. Kale nodded. "If you wish to hear more. There are many stories and many lessons that the Council has forgotten or ignored. I will share them with you if you are willing to listen." Lyra smiled, determination in her eyes. "I will listen. I want to understand." As she watched him leave, Lyra felt the weight of the knowledge she had gained. Humans were not conquerors, not destroyers. They were survivors, innovators, and thinkers. And their approach to life, to struggle, and to choice was a force the galaxy had not yet reckoned with. That evening, as Lyra returned to her chambers, she found the Council in session. Their discussions were about trade, alliances, and power struggles. They spoke of fleets and weapons, of diplomacy and control. And yet, in her mind, Lyra kept the stories Kale had told her. She understood that real strength was not measured by armies or influence, but by resilience, ingenuity, and the courage to endure. The palace seemed smaller to her now. The glittering halls less impressive. Knowledge, she realized, could challenge even the most formidable walls. Kale's words had planted a seed of thought that would not be easily forgotten. That night, as she gazed out of her window at the twin moons above, Lyra thought about humans walking under alien skies, building, dreaming, and surviving. She imagined the blue oceans of Earth, the green forests, the vast deserts, and the cities full of lights and music. She could feel the pulse of life in those distant lands, a rhythm unlike any she had known in the palace. And she knew, deep within her heart, that Kale's stories were only the beginning. There was much more to learn, much more to understand, and perhaps one day, much more to witness. The galaxy was wide, and humans, once considered myths, were very real, very capable, and perhaps very powerful in ways no one had yet imagined. Lyra closed her eyes, letting the images of Earth and its people fill her mind. She thought of the challenges they had faced, the failures they had endured, and the courage they had shown. She thought of Kale's calm, confident voice and the truth in his words. Humans were a force not because of domination or conquest, but because of choice, perseverance, and the ability to endure against all odds. And that, she realized, was a kind of power that even the greatest empires of the galaxy could not ignore. The stars outside the palace shone with a quiet brilliance, and for the first time, Lyra felt that the universe was not only vast, but full of possibilities she had never considered. Possibilities that could change everything she thought she knew. And somewhere, far across the stars, Kale's world waited, a world of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And Lyra knew that soon, the palace, the council, and perhaps the entire galaxy would have to reckon with what he had revealed. That humans, though underestimated for centuries, had a power of a different kind. A power that could not be measured by fleets or weapons, but by heart, mind, and spirit. The following morning, the palace hummed with a different kind of energy. Courtiers whispered in corridors, glancing at one another with uncertainty. Kyle's presence had stirred something unusual. A human, long believed to be a myth, was speaking truths that many could not ignore. Yet curiosity alone was not enough for the council. They needed to test him. Princess Lyra, still captivated by Kale's words, awaited his arrival in the private garden. She had barely slept, thinking of the stories of Earth, stories of endurance, creativity, and courage. She felt that understanding humans could change everything she had been taught. When Kale arrived, he carried himself with the same calm presence that had drawn her attention the first day. "You look troubled," he said softly, observing her. Lyra shook her head. "I am not troubled. I am thinking. I keep imagining what humans can do, and I cannot stop. But the Council, they will not accept your words so easily. They will want proof, evidence, something to justify your claims." Kyle's eyes darkened slightly. "They may seek proof, but some truths cannot be measured by charts or statistics. Humans are unpredictable because they are not machines. Their strength is not in control, but in resilience, creativity, and choice. These are things that cannot be captured by numbers alone." Lyra nodded. "Then you must prepare. I do not know how they will react, but they will challenge you, and you must answer carefully, or they will dismiss everything you have said." Kyle inclined his head. "I am ready. I will speak the truth, as I always do. The Council may not understand, but the truth has a way of finding its mark." By mid-afternoon, the Council convened in the Grand Hall. The room was vast, filled with statues of past rulers and banners representing every major civilization in the galaxy. Nobles gathered around the central table, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Kyle was led to the front, where he would speak before the Council. The head counselor, an imposing figure with eyes sharp as blades, addressed him first. "Kale of Earth, you claim that humans are capable of extraordinary resilience and ingenuity. You speak of them as though they are equal to, or perhaps even superior to, the civilizations we govern. Explain yourself. How can a species so primitive compete with the power of the galaxy?" Kale's gaze was steady. "Primitive," he repeated softly, almost in disbelief. "Perhaps by your measures. But strength is not always in fleets, armies, or planets conquered. Humans are strong because they endure. They create. They survive against impossible odds. They learn from failure. And they inspire one another to rise again when everything seems lost. That is a kind of power that cannot be measured by conquest or domination." Murmurs spread through the Council. Some nobles laughed, dismissing him. "Words of a storyteller," one muttered. Others frowned, clearly unsettled. Kyle's quiet confidence and the weight of his words struck them in a way they could not ignore. The head counselor leaned forward. "You speak of survival, of creativity, of inspiration, but the galaxy measures power in fleets, weapons, and territories. How can humans match us in these terms?" Kale did not flinch. "Humans do not need to match you in your terms. They survive, adapt, and innovate in ways you cannot predict. History has shown this again and again. Entire civilizations believed they had control, only to be surprised by the creativity and determination of humans. Underestimating them has always been a mistake." The Council fell silent. A few nobles exchanged worried glances. Kyle's calm manner and insistence on truth challenged everything they had ever believed. For centuries, humans had been dismissed as myths or weaklings. Now, standing before them, a single human questioned their assumptions with quiet authority. Princess Lyra stood beside the council chamber, her eyes fixed on Kyle. She felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. She understood his words and their implications. If the council took him seriously, it could change the way they governed, the way they viewed power, and perhaps even the way the galaxy operated. But if they dismissed him, humans could arrive unprepared for the reality of their potential, and the consequences could be immense. One of the counselors, a stern woman with silver hair, rose to challenge Kale directly. "You speak of humans as though they are beyond our understanding. But humans are fallible. They make mistakes. They destroy themselves. How can such a species pose any real threat to the galaxy?" Kyle's eyes softened, but his voice carried weight. Yes, humans are fallible. They make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are catastrophic. But what makes them formidable is not perfection. It is their ability to rise from failure, to learn, to adapt, and to continue forward. Other civilizations measure strength in weapons or fleets. Humans measure strength in choice, resilience, and innovation. That is a force that cannot be easily predicted or controlled. The counselor's face tightened, but she was not prepared for what Kale said next. Underestimating humans has been a mistake throughout history. Those who assumed they were weak were often defeated by their resourcefulness and determination. Humans survive not because they are the strongest, but because they refuse to give up. And when they arrive in this part of the galaxy, I believe many will be surprised at their capabilities. A murmur of concern spread. Some counselors whispered, unsure if they had been careless in dismissing an entire species. Others clenched their fists, uneasy at the idea that their assumptions could be wrong. Kale's words had planted doubt, and doubt could grow quickly into fear or understanding, depending on how it was handled. Lyra stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "Kyle speaks the truth. I have listened to his stories. Humans are not invincible, but they are remarkable. They have endured, created, and inspired. And perhaps the galaxy could learn something from them." A ripple of shock passed through the chamber. For a princess to support a human openly was nearly unheard of. Some counselors gasped, others whispered, and a few stared in disbelief. Lyra met their gaze steadily, refusing to back down. The head counselor's voice was sharp. "Princess Lyra, your curiosity is noted, but one human's stories do not rewrite centuries of knowledge. Kale, you claim humans are extraordinary. Prove it. Show us how a single species can survive and thrive where we believe they cannot." Kale's expression remained calm. Proof cannot always be shown immediately. History itself is proof. The records of humans surviving plagues, wars, and disasters, creating art, science, and communities along the way, are proof. Their strength is not in instant display, but in persistence over time. And when they come here, their actions will speak for themselves. The room was silent. Some counselors were visibly unsettled, realizing that Kale's words challenged the very foundation of their beliefs. For centuries, humans had been dismissed, underestimated, and ignored. Now the council could not deny the possibility that their assumptions were wrong. A younger counselor, eager to challenge Kale further, spoke up. "And if humans arrive with fleets or weapons, how will we defend ourselves against them?" Kale's gaze was steady, his voice calm. "They will not arrive seeking conquest. Humans value freedom, choice, and cooperation. They will not accept subjugation, and they will not impose tyranny, but they will resist oppression. Those who underestimate them or attempt to control them may find themselves surprised. Humans are clever, adaptable, and relentless when their survival or values are threatened." Whispers filled the hall. Some counselors looked uncomfortable, realizing that Kyle was predicting a future they had not prepared for. Others were intrigued, their minds opening to a new possibility, that humans were not a species to be dismissed lightly. Princess Lyra stepped closer to Kale, her voice quiet but firm. "Tell them what you told me, about creativity, courage, and endurance, about how humans survive through choice, not fear." Kale nodded. "Humans endure because they choose to. They fail and rise again, not because they must, but because they believe in something greater than themselves. Their ingenuity, resilience, and empathy are strengths that cannot be measured by armies or empires, and those who ignore this will eventually regret it. The room fell into a heavy silence. Even the head counselor was thoughtful. Realizing that dismissing humans outright could be a grave error, Kale's words had done more than inform. They had unsettled, challenged, and inspired thought. Finally, the session ended. Kale bowed politely, his calm demeanor unchanged. Princess Lyra followed him out of the chamber, her mind racing. They listened, she said softly, some with doubt, some with curiosity. But they could not ignore you. Kale's eyes met hers. Doubt can grow into understanding, or it can fester into fear. The choice is theirs. What matters is that the idea of humans is no longer ignored or forgotten. That is the first step toward change. Lyra nodded, understanding. She realized that Kale's presence was already reshaping the palace, challenging centuries of belief and forcing the council to reconsider what strength truly meant. Humans were no longer myths. They were real, capable, and perhaps soon to arrive in the galaxy in ways no one could predict. As they walked through the palace corridors, Lyra felt a new sense of purpose. She wanted to learn more, understand more, and ensure that the council would be ready, not for war, but for the arrival of a species that could reshape the galaxy through courage, creativity, and resilience. Kale's words echoed in her mind. Humans endure because they choose to. They fail and rise again. They are unpredictable, capable, and powerful in ways that no one can measure. And the palace, grand and proud, would have to confront this truth sooner or later. That evening, Lyra stood by her window, gazing at the stars. The palace seemed smaller now, the council's power less absolute. She thought of Kyle, of Earth, and of the countless humans who had persevered against impossible odds. The galaxy, she realized, would soon face a force it had never reckoned with, not through domination, but through spirit, intellect, and determination. And deep within her, Lyra felt both fear and hope. Fear for those who underestimated humans, hope for the possibilities their presence could bring. The palace had already begun to change, not through fleets or weapons, but through the simple, undeniable power of truth. The palace was unusually quiet the following morning. The grand halls, usually alive with whispers and soft steps of attendants, felt heavy with anticipation. Kyle had spent the night in a small guest chamber, and Princess Lyra had barely slept, thinking over every word he had spoken, every story of humans and their resilience. She could feel the shift in the palace already. The council was uneasy. Some nobles whispered in small groups, while others stared openly at the stars visible through the grand windows, as if searching for answers. Kale walked through the corridors with his usual calm, noting the tension around him. This was not mere curiosity. This was the first stirrings of uncertainty in a civilization that had long believed it understood all life in the galaxy. He had seen this many times before, though only from afar. The palace, once secure in its pride and control, was beginning to sense the truth he had brought. Humans were not to be underestimated. Lyra met him in the gardens, the soft glow of alien flora illuminating her determined face. "Today," she said quietly, "they will ask questions. They will demand answers. And some may try to dismiss you even now. Are you ready?" Kale nodded. "I am ready. I do not seek their approval. I seek only to speak truth. The rest will follow in time." By mid-morning, the council gathered in the main hall once again. Nobles filled the room, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and unease. The head counselor, tall and stern, began the session with a sharp tone. "Kyle of Earth, your words have caused unrest and debate. Some find them inspiring, others find them threatening. Today we seek clarity. You claim that humans possess strength that rivals the greatest civilizations. Explain and provide guidance. Why should the galaxy take humans seriously? Kale's voice carried over the hall, calm yet resonant. Humans are capable of extraordinary things because of choice, resilience, and creativity. They survive disasters that destroy nations. They build, invent, and create even when resources are scarce. They endure suffering and yet find ways to help one another. They are not perfect, and they make mistakes, but they learn from them. That is why they endure, why they rise, and why they are formidable. The head counselor's eyes narrowed. Words alone are not enough. Tell us what humans will do when they arrive here. Will they conquer? Will they destroy? Or will they bend to our rules, as lesser species have? Kyle met the counselor's gaze steadily. Humans will not conquer for the sake of conquest. They do not seek domination. They value freedom and choice. They will resist oppression, and they will protect themselves and their values. Those who underestimate them or attempt to control them may face consequences they do not expect. Humans are unpredictable, but that unpredictability comes from intelligence, creativity, and moral choice, not from malice. A murmur of concern rippled through the room. Many nobles exchanged uneasy glances. For centuries, humans had been considered myths, weak and insignificant. Now, standing before them, a single human was challenging their assumptions with undeniable authority. One of the younger counselors spoke, clearly anxious. You describe humans as unpredictable and powerful in ways we cannot measure. But if they are so capable, why have they not come here before? Kyle's eyes softened, as though recalling a distant memory. Humans have lived in isolation for most of their history. They faced their own challenges first, learning to survive and thrive on a single world. Their isolation allowed them to grow without interference, to develop resilience and creativity without reliance on outside powers. Now, they are ready to explore and to interact with the galaxy, and when they do, the galaxy will see a force unlike any it has encountered. The room grew tense. The counselors were beginning to grasp the implications. Humans were not weak. They were not passive. They were a force of endurance, intellect, and moral strength. This truth challenged every assumption the council had made about power, domination, and survival. Princess Lyra stepped forward. Her voice was calm but firm, carrying through the hall. Kyle speaks the truth. I have listened to him, and I believe what he says. Humans are not here to conquer, but to survive, to learn, and to grow. They are capable of great things because they choose to be. Their strength is in their perseverance, their ingenuity, and their capacity to care for one another. We ignore them at our peril. A sharp gasp ran through the council. Lyra's open support for a human was unprecedented. Some counselors frowned, while others whispered to one another, clearly disturbed by the idea. The head counselor, however, remained silent, considering the words carefully. Kale spoke again, addressing the entire assembly. Humans will arrive not as conquerors, but as equals. Those who seek to understand them will gain insight, and perhaps even partnership. Those who seek to control or dismiss them may find themselves unprepared for the consequences. Humans act not from fear, but from choice, and that choice, combined with their resilience and intelligence, makes them formidable. For a long moment, the council remained silent. No one dared speak, for Kale's words carried an authority that was undeniable. He had painted a picture of humanity that could not be ignored. Humans were not a threat in the traditional sense. They did not wield fleets or empires to crush others, but their strength lay in qualities that could shift the balance of the galaxy in unexpected ways. The head counselor finally spoke, his tone softer than before. Kale, your words challenge centuries of assumptions. If what you say is true, Then humanity represents a force unlike any we have seen. How can we prepare? How should we respond? Kale's eyes met his. Prepare by understanding, not by fearing. Humans value alliances, trust, and mutual respect. They can be friends, partners, and allies, but they will never be controlled. Learn from them. Observe them. Do not underestimate them, and do not seek to dominate them. That is how the galaxy can benefit from their presence, rather than be harmed by it. The counselors whispered among themselves, some nodding slowly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The room had shifted. For the first time, the council was not simply evaluating humans. They were reconsidering the nature of power itself. Humans represented a new kind of strength, one built on endurance, ingenuity, and moral courage, rather than conquest and fear. Princess Lyra turned to Kale. The council will listen to you now, but there are still those who will resist the truth. How can we ensure they understand before humans arrive? Kale's expression was calm, his voice steady. You cannot force understanding, but you can guide it. Share the stories, the lessons, and the truths. Show them what humans are capable of, and let their own minds reach the conclusion. People fear what they do not understand, but curiosity and knowledge can overcome that fear. Lyra nodded. She realized that this was her role now, not just as a princess, but as someone who had seen the truth and could carry it forward. Humans were coming, and the galaxy needed to prepare, not for war, but for the arrival of a species that could reshape the universe through perseverance, intelligence, and choice. As the council meeting ended, Kale was escorted from the hall. Whispers followed him down the corridors, some skeptical, some intrigued. For the first time, humans were no longer myths. They were a reality the galaxy could not ignore, and their presence promised change. Later that evening, Lyra met Kale in the private garden. The twin moons cast silver light over the alien flowers, their petals glowing softly. They are thinking, she said. Some will understand, some will resist. But your words have reached them, and that is a beginning. Kale nodded. The beginning is always the hardest part. The galaxy must come to terms with the truth on its own. My role is simply to speak it. Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting the light of the moons. And when humans arrive? Kale's gaze was steady, his voice quiet but firm. They will arrive as they always do, resilient, determined, and unyielding. Some will seek understanding, others may test them, but humanity will endure, adapt, and act with intelligence and choice, and those who respect them may gain allies unlike any they have known. Those who oppose them may face consequences they cannot predict. Lyra felt a shiver run through her. Humans were coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. She realized that Kale's words were not just stories. They were warnings, lessons, and revelations all at once. The palace, once secure in its pride and tradition, had been shaken by a single human speaking the truth, and now the universe itself seemed poised for change. The next few days passed in a tense rhythm. Kyle continued to meet with Lyra, sharing more stories and insights about humans. He spoke of their cities, their inventions, their art, and their courage. He told tales of ordinary people performing extraordinary acts, of communities surviving impossible odds, and of individuals choosing morality and creativity over fear. Each story left Lyra more convinced that humans were a force unlike any the galaxy had known. Meanwhile, the council struggled with their response. Some nobles embraced Kale's insights, seeing the wisdom in preparing for humans as equals. Others resisted, clinging to old ideas of domination and control. The palace itself seemed divided, its foundations shaken not by war, but by the simple, undeniable power of truth. One evening, Lyra stood alone on her balcony, gazing at the stars. She thought of Kale, of Earth, and of the countless humans whose resilience had allowed them to survive and grow. She understood now that strength was not measured by fleets, weapons, or control. It was measured by choice, perseverance, and the courage to endure against impossible odds. And deep within her, Lyra felt a mixture of hope and fear. Hope for the possibilities that humans could bring, fear for those who underestimated them. The palace had already begun to change, not through armies or conquest, but through understanding and truth. Kale's presence had done more than educate the princess or challenge the council. It had planted a seed that would grow into awareness, preparedness, and perhaps even alliance. The galaxy, for all its pride and power, would soon face a species that could not be ignored, controlled, or dismissed. Lyra understood the truth now. Humans were coming, not as conquerors, but as a force of resilience, ingenuity, and moral courage. And the palace, once secure in its arrogance, would have to reckon with this reality. As the twin moons rose higher, casting silver light over the palace, Lyra felt a quiet certainty. The council would have to make choices, the galaxy would have to prepare, and humans would arrive soon. And when they did, the universe would see what Kale had been trying to show them all along, that true strength was not always in power or domination, but in the courage to endure, the intelligence to adapt, and the wisdom to choose what was right. The stars outside shimmered like distant witnesses, and somewhere far across the galaxy, Earth continued to turn, unaware of the palace that had been shaken by the truth of its people. And in that moment, Lyra knew that everything was about to change. The story of humans, once dismissed as myth, was no longer a tale. It was a promise, and the galaxy would soon see what resilience, choice, and courage could accomplish.